Hello. The debate over what replaces austerity is underway, and public sector pay is at the heart of it. The 1% cap on pay rises remains for now, but there are those in government who want more pay for public workers paid for by tax rises, others who think we should borrow to pay them more, and presumably others who think the pay cap should stay for the next few years until the deficit is definitively slain. Well, the economic arguments are interesting, given that the deficit is not the problem it was. But the politics is even more interesting. Even among a certain class of deficit headbangers, the will for austerity is fading. And then there's the fact the debate about it within government is so public.
1,000 firemen from all parts of the country head for Hyde Park, past Marble Arch, through the rain, to publicise their demand for higher pay.
Public sector pay has long been an issue, and an emotive one.
One claim for more money everybody supports, except the powers that be, is the nurses.
And this, 2010, is when the latest vagaries affected public servants.
The government is asking the public sector to accept a 2-year pay freeze.
That was then followed by a 1% cap on pay rises.
Is it just more cuts, Chancellor?
Year after year, who knew we'd still be talking about it in 2017? The problem is that in delivering spending cuts, each small-sounding 1% saved on public sector pay lops almost $2 billion off public spending. For ages, restraint seemed like easy money for the Exchequer. And there was a holy trinity of arguments in favour. One, back in 2010, the need to make savings was greater, with the deficit running at 10% of national income. Two, the justification was clearer as well. Public sector pay was running perhaps a little higher than equivalent private sector pay. And three, public sector workers had not seen their pensions as badly curtailed.
In 2010, public sector pay was a relatively attractive thing to hold down, partly because it had done so much better than private sector pay in the years following the recession, and therefore the government might have thought that it could suppress public sector pay growth without too much pain in terms of people leaving and getting jobs in the private sector.
Now, all three of the trinity of arguments have diminished. The deficit is smaller. The public sector pay advantage over private sector workers has shrunk away, and public sector pensions have been trimmed as well. So, is Whitehall ready to declare austerity dead? Well, cautious economists may worry that the public sector only has two modes: tap shut or tap gushing. With urgency over the deficit gone, it won't be a careful easing of pay restraints on a case-by-case basis. No, it'll be a money rush. Doesn't have to happen, of course, but it takes strong leadership to stop it happening, and with minority government, we don't have strong leadership. Which is why it seems post-austerity politics has been unleashed in an ill-disciplined way. Let's not jump ahead of ourselves. The policy has not changed for now, but the talk has surely gone too far for the direction of travel to remain unchanged for long. Well, let's do a little bit more on the politics there. Our political editor, Nick Watt, is with me. Nick, just tell us a little more about the goings-on and the behind-the-scenes sort of cabinet machinations on this.
Well, there is irritation in the Treasury bordering on fury that now we've had a third of the cabinet basically signalling that they want that 1% public sector pay cap to be reviewed. I'm hearing talk that these ministers are virtue signalling. And what has happened to the constitutional principle that the Prime Minister is first among equals? It turns out all the cabinet think they are equal. Now, in a speech tonight to the CBI, the Chancellor said that at the moment there is no change to the policy of striking what he called the right balance between being fair to our public servants and fair to those who pay for them. But he said the government is continually assessing that balance, and in a sign of how complex he regards this is, he said that there should be a grown-up debate on how to fund public services, but he said the only way to do that sustainably in the long term is by growing the economy.
Grown-up debate. Why do we have a childish debate for once? Do you think Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, do you think he can really do anything about this? Will he do anything about this?
Well, this is a minority government, and so it feels to me that the Chancellor may well act in his budget later this year and may even send out a signal in the run-up to that budget. Now, interestingly, in his speech tonight, He said that the spike in inflation due to currency depreciation has led to what he just called frustration over the stagnation in real pay growth. So I understand that there is a concern between the gap between that 1% pay cap and inflation, which is currently running at close to 3%. So I think what we could be looking at later this year is movement in that area by putting a link between inflation and public sector pay rise. Maybe not a real terms rise in pay, but what you could maybe see is perhaps you could have a rise in pay at 1% below the Consumer Prices Index.
Nick, thank you very much indeed. Well, Kenneth Clarke was Chancellor of the Exchequer between 1993 until 1997. Obviously, he's had a number of other senior cabinet roles where he's spent money as well as dishing it out. But in his years at the Treasury, the deficit came down very substantially. Very good evening to you. Do you think there's an economic case at the moment for continuing with pay restraint in the public sector beyond, say, this year into extra years?
Yes, I'm afraid there is, until the economy shows signs of definitely recovering from the current very serious slowdown. I mean, you've got to work out this. Now we are a minority government, but one that's intending to go on, what your aims are. And I assume we're going to carry on for 2 or 3 years. And I think we've got to deliver successful government, which at the end means we show we're competent, we have a reasonable economy, we've avoided going into recession, we're getting near a reasonable Brexit deal, and we're achieving some reasonable growth. Now, if everybody's going to start giving into the lobby of the week, and this week it's public sector pay because it's the
lobby of the week in terms of like lobby of the day, as opposed to lobby of the vulnerable.
It's suddenly the political bubble's got seized with this last 2 or 3 days because it's the public sector trades unions conference season.
Well, you may say
and
this.
what you cannot do is give into that what would be disastrous at the moment, to be quite silly economic policy, to start putting money in to fuel a burst in pay in the public sector pursuing inflation.
But you're making out that the case for public sector pay rises is just kind of weakness and stupidity.
No,
actually, there are retention problems in the public sector, which mean trying to get decent workers, you have to pay them a little bit more. The public sector used to be paid more than the private sector. That's gone. You can't rely on that anymore.
Not quite gone, but in parts of the country, they're still the most secure and desirable jobs you have. The nurses are being used as nurses are so popular, so highly respected by me and other people, that you always put those on the front line if you're running a pay claim. And we have a problem with nurses. The Brexit's called a devaluation, which has made this country less attractive for foreign nurses to work in, and the Romanians have all gone back.
But whatever the cause,
whatever the cause, to do with the pay level.
No, but whatever the cause, basic economics tells you if you're short of people, you pay a bit more to get them, and that's what you do.
The reason you're not retaining nurses is pay, but I don't think how much you're going to give. I mean, the politics are very bad. If the government gives into this, it won't get any credit for it. Firstly, our opponents, the Labour Party, will say it's not enough. You've abandoned your cap, but we give more than that. And the newspapers and the political bubble will say another defeat for May and the Chancellor. They've all been defeated.
Right,
they've given in. That's what happened to that very sensible decision on abortion for Northern Ireland women, which I'm sure Theresa May was extremely anxious to agree with, but it was portrayed as a defeat for her.
Right. So you think the politics says you have to stand firm because
you've got to explain.
By responding to Labour's manifesto, which by all accounts was rather popular compared to yours, responding to that by trying to sort of get halfway or match certain of the things isn't going to work.
You have to explain why, if you're in government, you have to take tough, difficult decisions which are in the general public interest, including public servants, because you wish to keep a strong, growing, modern economy.
We could talk
and just
for ages.
throwing money about to make yourself more popular next week when it won't even succeed in doing that is a mistake.
Let me ask you this. When you were Chancellor, you got the deficit down. It wasn't starting from such a high base. And you took unpopular actions. You put up taxes and you cut spending. And you did them in about even measure. And that was a political choice. You could have weighed them up in different ways, but you thought, let's be a centrist government. We'll do a bit on spending and a bit on taxes, or quite a bit on both. George Osborne's austerity was very different. It was 80%, in fact now more than 80%, on spending. He didn't put up taxes. You could quite reasonably say it's gone too far on the public service side. We need to spend more, and will put up taxes to pay for it.
But he took over from a very high-taxing government, so he had constraints. What you have to do, what Philip has to do, is address the reality of the economic situation of the moment. Behind all this, somebody used earlier the phrase grown-up politics. If you're in government, unlike these other people sailing around doing interviews and so on, you have to look at the reality. And what it's your duty to deliver is an economy which in 2 or 3 years' time is better than it was when you took over. The Labour Party howled at everything I did. When we reached the election, we were miles ahead of them in the opinion polls on the economy, and Tony Blair and Gordon Brown said they wouldn't change a jot of my spending and tax decisions.
What do you think Philip Hammond means by grown-up conversation? Does that mean the conversation isn't grown up at the moment?
What addresses the extremely serious economic problems we face when we've slowed down very severely.
But is it not grown up at the moment? Come on, make a cheap political point about it.
As far as the general political bubble, it's the politicians as much as the media, it's not grown up at all. The fact is Brexit's making us poorer. It has actually stimulated a devaluation and inflation, and living standards are dropping. Uncertainty is stopping investment. We're the slowest growing economy. Now, this may be temporary.
It's interesting that the Brexiteers the Brexiteers, Gove and Johnson, are the two who've been out in the last 24 hours suggesting, you know, the public sector pay needs to be eased.
I think, with great respect, I think your clips span what Michael said. I'm delighted to see...
Do you think so? You don't think Michael Gove thinks...
You cut out all the stuff where he talked about fiscal discipline. And you're not alone. Everybody else is doing that. I'm delighted to see cabinet ministers going out and being allowed, let out of the cupboard, being allowed to do what cabinet ministers should do, and go out and talk about politics and defend their policies, explain why they're doing things. I think Philip should do more of it. I think Theresa should, and go back to sensible debate. All this PR rubbish about the grid and going out and giving slogans. We're getting rid of all that.
Hang on.
I
want to be clear.
They're new at it. They need some practice.
Basically,
and they'll find they'll get spun to make mischief.
But basically, you're saying
Gove's comments are perfectly all right.
You're basically saying it's not a cabinet of ill discipline. Or at least we shouldn't worry. If it is, it's sort of authentic.
It's not as ill discipline as you're making it seem. And I think they will. I think they need to be reminded that they've all got to concentrate on the serious job in hand, because the whole cabinet will go down if they just respond to populist urges of the week in question and make a mess of the economy when people look back in 2 or 3 years' time.
Very interesting.
And you'll make a mess of the economy if you pour money into starting wage inflation. The bank will have to raise interest rates. You will cast serious doubt on our economic future.
You cast the public sector pay issue with populism, and which is a word bandied around a lot, including by me. You see it as all part of one and the same.
It's this week's media campaign.
Last one.
The nurses and the doctors settle for 1% without any particular demur 2 months ago. Suddenly,
they may well
it's the great passionate cause of the day.
You'll be stirring them
shortly after they've settled.
Last one. You famously called Theresa May a bloody difficult woman.
Yeah.
She took that as a badge of honour and was quoting it. Do you still think she's a bloody difficult woman, or do you think she's a bit of a pushover?
She needs to be difficult. I hope
is she, or is she a pushover? She gave more to the reportedly gave more to the DUP than she intended.
What I hope is she proves to be a bloody difficult woman. Say, look, we have a serious task of government here.
Is she proving to be
Let us follow grown-up politics. We're getting stuck in that cliche. Let us understand we have an economic difficulty. We do not want to be left behind by the developed world. We have a lot of tough challenges. We're not suddenly throwing money about so we can imitate the Labour Party and say we're giving everybody a pay rise. You'll set off private sector pay rises, you'll set off a rise in interest rates, and you'll cause another blow to confidence, and you'll cause further slowdown in the economy.
Clark, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.